Welcome back to Appropriations 101. We are into our discussions with our 12 subcommittee chairmen that make up the chairmanship of the 12 bills that make up the discretionary budget. We started off this process with the full committee chairman, Tom Cole. Today we are having a special guest, David Joyce from Ohio's great 14th district. Is that right?
That's correct.
He's a great member of Congress, and he chairs the Financial Services and General Government Appropriation. Now you may wonder what is in a bill like that. That's what we're going to talk to David about what is in the bill and what are some of the challenges that he faces. But I will tell you to start with, it is about $23 billion that we spend in that bill. That is about 1/3 of 1% of the overall spending that the federal government does when you include mandatory spending. It's about 1.5% of the discretionary spending that we do in the Appropriations Committee. So it's not, while $23 billion is a lot of money, in the overall scheme of things, it's not a huge amount of money in the bill, but it has some very important functions. So David, tell us what's in the Financial Services bill and what the challenges are you face.
Thank you, Mike, and I appreciate you putting this together because I think it is important. Since I've got here, I said we should have an Appropriations 101.
Yeah.
Because I think there's a lot of members who don't really understand all the things that are being done here. When you talk about the things that are actually driving our debt, obviously it's mandatory spending.
Right.
And I know when I first got here, Chairman Rogers had told me at the time when he first got here, it was 35-65, and it's now 65% mandatory, or then it was when I got on. And now we're up to 74% mandatory spending. So we all get our top line number, as you know, from the chairman, and mine was lower than last year's spending. But we then try to make all the different agencies underneath us, such as IRS, all the executive offices, branches, the judiciary, the Supreme Court is underneath us, as well as the federal court system. And we go in and look in those areas that we can pare down and work on doing that. And one of the top ones happened to be the IRS, because the IRS had excessive funding from the Inflation Reduction Act that was sitting there. So instead of adding more to that, we wanted to start to spend down the $40 billion that they still have sitting in an account from that. The offices, with the one of the challenges with the Supreme Court, we went over to meet with them, is with all the threats upon them now, they've had a service of protection provided by the goodness, if you will, of the Department of Justice and using the U.S. Marshals, but they need to bring that in-house so they can continue to have the 24-hour protection that the justices and their employees and the people who come to the Supreme Court to hear cases would expect that level of.
Does that include protecting the justices at home? Because we've had recent events where justices in their homes have had protesters outside, and there's been, I think there was one where they found someone who was there with the intent to try to harm one of the justices. So does that include that type of protection for them at home also?
That's exactly what they're looking for, and to do it, as you know, it's not just one person.
Yeah.
You need a rotating staff, so if you have two on, it's really 6 per justice to have 8-hour shifts to make sure that they're safe. And they're family members. Some of the justices have young children, so want to make sure their kids are protected as well. So that's going to be a new expense. So you try to figure out where we can find the money, and we have then obviously cut from other areas. But the way I've approached it is that when we come up with the top line number, when I meet with the directors and the agency administrators, I say to them that we're going to cut your spending, or your allocation, but I leave it up to you to figure out how to cut that spending, because we're not in there every day. Yeah. They need to know if there was a project that they said 3 years ago that they were going to do, and it costs X, and then it's only produced Y, then explain the delta. Well, why is it working or why isn't it working? And you make that cut on your own. If we come in and make cuts, you may not like them. Yeah. So that's why I think it's important to engage and be straightforward with the people that are coming before you, so they can understand and appreciate where you're coming from.
Well, you mentioned that your allocation this year is below last year's, and last year was below the year before. And, so, and that's one of the things we're trying to do, is try to get our budget back in order, even though, as you said, the discretionary spending is less than a little over a quarter of the overall spending. That still means we have to try to control the discretionary spending. So most of the chairmen that we will have before us of the various subcommittees, their allocation is going to be less than last year. So they're going to be making the same tough decisions that you have to make it's interesting that you do it by talking to the agency and say, where do you think we ought to cut? Because you're not going to have as much money as you did the year before. And that's true of almost every agency. Defense, we try to increase a little bit, try to keep up with inflation, but we're not even keeping up with inflation with defense and stuff. So people say cut spending, and that sounds like it's easy. It's not always easy. We don't fund anything that I think is stupid. Right. If I did, I'd vote against it. So would you.
It'll make it easier to cut.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that would save us an area where we could cut money to do the things that we think is necessary.
But I felt like last year when I was at Homeland Security, and I made the same approach, and the only one that I said I was going to draw the line on not cutting it all was system, because I think cyber is well, obviously everybody on their phone now banks and does everything else in cyber, but it's also the threats that we're going to see to our infrastructure through hijacking. You see it through what's happening at hospitals and schools and other areas of that. And they were having a hard time competing in the against the private sector for employees. So I said I was going to do that, which of course, in the end, I had to. Yeah. But at least I explained it up front. And when I went back to the assistant director and said, okay, the time has come, I can't hold out anymore, we're going to have to cut something. And they said, well, we finally got to the level that we needed, and we can hold off on replacing some folks. And so I think it's much easier to work with the agency directors if you at least give them a heads up it's coming, instead of telling them at the last minute. Yeah. And we ultimately need to learn to do more with less. And I think that working together with them, they're hopefully on the same page with us, being good stewards of the taxpayer money, that they'll also realize that they have to find those cuts, that the money is not going to continue to increase as it has in the past.
Well, you bring up a subject that is near and dear to my heart that I actually think is the biggest threat facing this country, and that is cybersecurity. And it's almost every agency has some role in trying to protect cybersecurity. It's a huge issue in the energy arena and that kind of stuff, because I tell people only half jokingly that I'm not as worried about a nuclear weapon because we would know where it came from, who fired it, et cetera, et cetera. You could take down our banking system, our electrical grid, all of those types of things, and you wouldn't know where it came from. Right. So protecting our cyber infrastructure is vitally important in this country, and it's not just I'm going to make an investment and then it's done. Right. It's a continuous type of thing that needs to happen.
Well, because as you know, there's bad actors and there's bad actor nations that spend all day, every day, going after our systems. Yeah. And so nobody's safe from that attack. And I agree with you wholeheartedly that we know with the nuclear weapon where it's coming from, and we've got systems in place to protect and prevent us. But we certainly, it's something that's so cutting edge. I went to one event to learn more about artificial intelligence, and that's something that we're really at the ground floor on here. Yeah. And they said that what happened in this year up in New Hampshire in the presidential race, where supposedly President Biden was calling folks and telling them not to come to the polls the next day. He said that'll be child's play to what they'll be able to do in 28. Yeah. They can run the whole candidacy. They can put up a candidate who everything is AI. And that's the crazy part. That's just 4 years away.
Yeah, and that scares the heck out of me, because they can make it so that, it's the old saying is, you're going to believe that or you're going to believe your lying eyes, And the problem is they can do a commercial, and they can essentially, if they've got a clip of you, they can make you say anything on that commercial. And how do you defend yourself saying, I never said that, Right. That is going to be a challenge for our political system and everything else moving forward in this country. Artificial intelligence I'm glad I'm getting older, because I'm not sure I want to deal with that in the future. I'm having hard enough time just dealing with regular intelligence, but anyway.
We can appreciate too, I always explained to folks back when we were young, there used to be a plastic box and it would ring and everybody in the house would run to it. Yeah. Hello?
And you have a little thing that dial like this.
Right. Yeah. And now everybody's on a cell phone, and you can make contracts in real time with somebody halfway across the world. So the world's changing. We need to keep up with that pace.
Yeah, and that is when I was in the Speaker of the House, and we were trying to decide for the legislature whether to buy a network computer system or a mainframe, And as the Speaker, I was always going, well, you guys are the experts. You decide which one to have. But once we spent the money, then it's done. Yeah. Nah, it goes on forever, and it does. But it's important for people to understand what we do here, what we do on our appropriations, and actually how careful we are, I think, with the taxpayers' dollars. As you know, anybody can look at an appropriation bill and say, well, I disagree with that expenditure, so I'm going to vote against it, and that kind of stuff. The biggest compromise in Congress is an appropriation bill, because we don't try to ignore what the Democrats' desires or requests are. They don't try to ignore what we are when they're in the majority. We try to work together in a nonpartisan fashion to try to face it, or to address the issue. And when we're in the majority, the bills are going to lean in our direction, obviously. When they're in the majority, they're going to lean in the Democrats' direction. But I find the Appropriations Committee to frankly be kind of a nonpartisan committee, trying to solve the problems and trying to make sure that we're using the taxpayers' dollars as most efficiently as we can.
I agree with you, and that's one of the things that I'm really proud about my time here on appropriations is we view ourselves as a body or a unit versus us against them, and try to get the end results that work. And for instance, with financial services, you have the Internal Revenue Service where they were going to add all these agents and all these players to the agency. As we talked about before, why aren't we automating that process? And why can't we fix the process? If you're making $60,000 in income and you have a wife and 2 kids, you're probably, all that's being withheld is going to be returned to you towards the end of the year, but through exemptions and credits and other things. So why don't we just leave it, letting people have that money up front instead of holding on to it and then giving it back to them? And that's the kind of stuff that I really think we can automate in such a way and change the system that is more fair to the hardworking taxpayers who are out there every day living from check to check.
Yeah, I agree. Well, thank you for joining us on this briefing of the financial services and general government appropriation. One of the 12 that we will be working on, and today, in fact, we just passed the VA military construction appropriation bill, so we've got one across the floor, and we're still working to get the others done. We hope to get them done on time. I know every appropriator hates to see a continuing resolution because we haven't got our jobs done on time, but that requires floor time, and it requires an amazing amount of time and effort that both you and your staff put in trying to draft these bills and address the concerns of Republicans and Democrats as we try to make this government work. So I appreciate you taking the time to join us today and talk about your appropriation bill.
Thank you. You're very kind. I'm glad we could try to make this work so all Americans understand we work for them.
Yep, exactly. Thank you. Appreciate it.